Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Morning for me on the West Coast. And because I'm on the West Coast, specifically, I want to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam nations. And as a settler on these lands, I am honored to live, work, and learn on them. Welcome to the session. I'm very happy to talk about this topic because it is something I'm extremely interested in and extremely interested in improving Islandora's capability to help institutions implement an effective digital preservation strategy and plans. And would love to hear how you all see Islandora doing that and see Islandora improve, how we can improve Islandora to do that effectively at your institutions and as a community. So the goals of this workshop over the next hour and a half are to situate Islandora and really other digital assets management platforms within digital preservation as an activity that we undertake in GLAMs. I also want to survey Islandora's digital preservation functionality and talk about some areas where it is deficient. It needs some work. And a couple in particular I'll spend a little bit of time soapboxing about because I think they're fundamental and we can do it. We can add those features if we put our minds and collective efforts to it. And I want to encourage us to start thinking about how we will be implementing Islandora at our respective institutions to support digital preservation. But one of the themes that you'll see quite strongly in this workshop is that Islandora is only a tool. It is not a solution for digital preservation. It doesn't buy you digital preservation. It is one tool amongst many, a very important tool that we can use. But there is a lot of organizational and institutional effort and work that needs to be done to support digital preservation that has really nothing to do with Islandora or any other tool. So first, just to talk about the role of digital assets management systems, DAMs, within digital preservation in heritage or GLAM organizations. I'm going to set the direction I want to take here with a couple of quotations, and I'll kind of comment on the quotations as we go through them. I just want to pause here for a second and just I want to say that I'm on a very small laptop screen and I can't see the audience or the Zoom avatars. So Isabella, if anyone has any questions or wants me to stop and explain something, can you moderate that from where you are?
Yep, for sure.
Okay, thank you. And interrupt me with your voice. Again, I'm not really seeing or paying attention to the.
Okay, I'll pay attention to both the chat and in-person hands and interrupt as needed, if that's what you're saying.
Yes, thanks. I know it's awkward. The hybrid conference is this awkward, and I regret that I can't be there with you in person. Thanks, Isabella. So everybody, if you want me to stop and explain something or say it again, please do so. I tend to talk quickly when I'm presenting, so please stop me and ask me to repeat it. First quotation is from David Rosenthal of the LOCKSS program at Stanford. There's more to come on the next screen, but I'll just start off by reading the first sentence here. The goal of a digital preservation system is that the information it contains remains accessible to users over a very long period of time. The key problem in the design of such systems is that the period of time is very long, much longer than the lifespan of the individual components, the media, hardware, and software components, and the formats in which the information is encoded. I'm going to pause here to just remind us that Islandora is one of the software components that Rosenthal et al. Are referring to. He's not referring to it specifically back in 2005, but it is one of the things that he's talking about here. And we'll look at this point in detail in a minute. If the period were shorter, that is the period of management of the information were shorter, it would be simple to satisfy the requirement by storing information on suitably long-lived media embedded in a system of similarly long-lived hardware and software. But no media, hardware, or software exists in whose longevity designers can place such confidence. So the TLDR of this passage is that the lifespan of any technology that we use to manage information, as they call it, or content, as we would call it in the GLAM community, maybe. The lifespan of any individual piece of technology is much, much shorter than the usable and expected lifespan of the content. In other words, that they don't align. One is very much shorter, one is very much longer. Second quotation I want to cite here is from an Ithaca SNR report that was published just 3 weeks ago. The important part here I want to emphasize is a quote from one of their the points in their executive summary. Because no digital preservation system is truly turnkey, digital preservation cannot be fully outsourced. Digital preservation is a distributed and iterative activity that requires in-house expertise, adequate staffing, and access to different technologies and systems. While it is possible to outsource key components of the digital preservation process to a system provider, I'll pause here to say that they interviewed me and a number of other members of the Islandora community for this report, and system provider is Islandora. It is not just the piece of software we call Islandora, but also kind of the Islandora software as an enterprise, like as an organization. While it is possible to outsource key components of the digital preservation process to a system provider, no digital preservation system is truly turnkey. Today, it is neither feasible nor desirable for a heritage organization to outsource responsibility for its digital preservation program. And again, this is from the just very recent off the press Ithaca SNR report called The Effectiveness and Durability of Digital Preservation and Curation Systems. And this is an important document. I recommend that you take a look at it if you're interested in digital preservation and in the landscape in which Islandora, Samvera, Fedora, other open source community-based systems and platforms, and a number of proprietary platforms are existing. This is kind of a marketplace for a survey of the marketplace and the sustainability of the set of platforms that GLAM organizations use in digital preservation or to implement digital preservation. The TLDR of this passage is that even though there are many, many systems out there from which organizations can choose, any system, any one system is not enough. There is a lot of organizational commitment in terms of staff, resources, and other things that are just as important, if not more important in some ways than the platform that they choose to adopt to implement digital preservation. My own take on these two ideas is that if you look at the typical lifespan of a DAMS platform, let's say Islandora, could be anyone, it doesn't matter, this is an abstract thought, not a specific one about Islandora. The typical lifespan of a DAMS platform, let's say 10, for the sake of argument, 10 years. But the expectation of access to the content that is managed by that platform is much, much longer. It is, an indeterminate amount of time. And even if you choose 50 years as that timeline for access to that content, and let's remember that 50 years is really 2 generations, right? It's our grandchildren. So if you imagine that the content that you're digitizing today and putting in Islandora, if it is not unreasonable to think that that your or someone else's grandkids are going to be wanting to access that content, right, 50 years from now. If 10 years is the lifespan of a DAMS platform, that means at least 5 migrations between now and when the grandkids are going to be accessing that content. And even if you removed all the technical challenges to durability in that 50 years and 5 migrations, things like bit rot or effective durable digital, effective durable structural metadata, things of that nature, format obsolescence, for example, file format obsolescence. These are technical problems and technical challenges, and over the history of the discipline of digital preservation, we've basically either come to not worry about some of them or solve some of them, pretty much. So I'm not too worried about solving the technical problems of digital preservation. I think they're fairly solvable in many cases. But even if you eliminated all the technical durability challenges in providing access over 50 years to the content that you're creating, digitizing, creating, stewarding, accessioning today, and putting in these systems, even if you eliminated all the technical durability challenges, a lot of organizational challenges to durability would still exist. And this is where it gets really brittle, right? Because, if people think that, oh, we can solve bit rot, we can solve structural metadata, we can solve format obsolescence. Again, those are all technical problems that we probably can solve. And many of us can imagine that with a little effort, we can solve them. I don't think any of us can really imagine, at least I really can't imagine the organizational challenges over 50 years to ensure access to the content that we all are managing now in Islandora or in any other platform. It boggles my mind. I simply don't have the imaginative or intellectual capacity to understand how those challenges will be met. All I can really do is trust that our organizations will have committed to solving to making that content accessible, and will do little things along the way. Past my professional career and past your professional careers, someone will take care of that. And that's a leap of faith. It's not a confidence in technology, and it's not a confidence in organizations. It's a leap of faith. So again, just to underscore the points that Rosenthal and et al. And the Ithaca team have made in those 2 slides, and not to seem too pessimistic, but the tools we choose today, whether it's Islandora or any other platform, and all the little tools that go together to make up all the microservices and other moving parts of these complex systems, those are important. They help the organizations implement digital preservation and implement digital preservation policies and action plans. They're very important. But the real challenges and the real work we need to do is not with the technology, it is with the organizations and with establishing organizational commitment to digital preservation. So I guess to summarize my soapbox speech here, I feel very strongly that digital preservation is more of an organizational problem and challenge than a technical challenge. And without the commitment of organizations that implement Islandora or any other platform, that platform's not going to solve the problem on its own. So the most important point I want to convey during this workshop, and I've even used a different color for background of the slide to make it stand out, is that Islandora is not a digital preservation solution, and we shouldn't be thinking of it as one. But what it is a digital assets management system that has many flexible, robust digital preservation functionalities that can support our institution's digital preservation strategies and plans. Yeah, that's all I'll say. really, to my mind, is that's the big split between the tools and the organization. And just to echo the Ithaca SNR folks, no one tool is turnkey. Even something as large and comprehensive and capable as Islandora, it's not the solution. And I don't think we should be thinking of it as a preservation solution, because if we do, we tend to fall into the trap of or the habit of assuming that Islandora will take care of it all. The tool Islandora will take care of it all, and it won't. It's not Islandora's responsibility to take care of it all, and it cannot. It is the institution's responsibility to commit to digital preservation and making that content accessible 50 years or more from now. And one of the tools they use to do that is Islandora. Just to, I know that I, really, again, I admit I'm on a soapbox here, but it's a very important point to me, and I hope to the community, and we'd be happy to hear alternate points of view. But I really think we need to have serious discussions about how we view Islandora as a tool within the activity of digital preservation. And just to give some broader context to that point, again, before we move on to some more of the detailed, juicy bits about Islandora itself as a tool, just want to look at 3 different community-accepted benchmarking or certification or certification tools, and just to put the importance and the location of the technology within these 3. First one is the Magenta book. This is the basis for what we commonly known as the TDR certification or track, and it's the basis for the ISO standard on certification for trustworthy digital repositories. And it is broken down into 4 sections. They're outlined here on the right: introduction, organizational structure, digital object management, infrastructure, and security management. Really, the tools like Islandora, or any of, it doesn't mention any specific tools because it's an abstract specification, but any technologies within the domain it is describing, and that is ensuring access to digital content. Really only 2 parts, and really only one, the number 3, the digital object management. That's the focus of where something like Islandora would play. Of course, the security management is also important. That's more about kind of general IT security management infrastructure. But the actual repository and tools around creating durable digital content is only one section of the 4 sections. The next one is the Core Trust Seal, which is a very much simpler, certification tool. The Magenta book, or specifically the ISO standard, it's based on. The standard is based on Magenta. There are only 6 certified repositories in the universe, and they're all on Earth, but there's only 6. It's so hard to get certified. There are only 6. The Core Trust Seal, there are over 100, so it's much simpler and much cheaper to be certified under the Core Trust Seal than it is under the track TDR certification. But the same point I'll make here again is that there are 16 sections or requirements, they call them in Core Trust Seal, and really only 6 of them, 6 of the 16, have to do with technology. The other 10 are about the organization. And sorry for the sloppy formatting here in this list, but these are the sections, these are the requirements outlined in the Core Trust Seal document that are about technology. The other 10 are about the organization. The last one, and the one that we'll be using in our exercise at the end of the workshop here, is the Digital Publishing Coalition, the DPC's rapid assessment model. And this is really not a certification tool. This is like the other 2 were. This one is really more of a self-assessment tool. So it's something that an organization will take and fill in a spreadsheet and use it as a way to identify gaps in the organization's capability, digital preservation capability. And I've picked out the 4 of the 11, I think, requirements that have anything to do with technology as far as Islandora is concerned. Bitstream preservation, content preservation, metadata management, and discovery and access. So the point of these 3 slides is to just illustrate how the commonly used tools in the digital preservation community, and we're talking here mainly about GLAMs, even though the Magenta book came from the aerospace industry, but we're talking about GLAMs here, the GLAM digital preservation community. These 3 tools and others, there are others. There's a small cluster of European tools that are kind of percolated up into the Digital Preservation Coalition. Sorry, into the Core Trust Seal, but they've been around for quite some time. They really don't focus on the technology; they focus on the organization. And when they do talk about technology, it is in a minor role. It's not the predominant solution to digital preservation. It's just the technology is a means to an end. It's not the only thing that is in play. There is a lot of organizational commitment and effort that needs to happen outside of any technology to result in effective digital preservation. So now that I've sort of set the context from my perspective on the role of Islandora or any other platform, but Islandora within digital preservation at your organizations and my organization, I want to talk about some of the ways in which Islandora can help support that. Some of the ways in which Islandora can be seen as a pretty well prepared platform for an organization who wants to implement a digital preservation plan or activity. So what I would like to do is talk about both functionality within Islandora 2 as it exists today, and what we have today, like right now, and then talk about areas where I think we need to improve Islandora or supplement it in some way. And so the first set of functionality is what we have now, and I'll outline it here, and then I'll talk about each of these in more detail and give you some not examples, but sort of some screenshots to kind of make it more real. But right now we have in Islandora 2, and much of this came also from Islandora 7X, but we have this now in Islandora 2. We have Fedora repository. I guess this obviously this is optional in Islandora. You don't need to use it. Some sites choose not to, some sites choose to, but if you do use it, it offers some added value, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides. We have Islandora FITS, which FITS is a separate tool independent of Islandora, used for file characterization and validation and other things, but basically generates technical metadata that is useful in the digital preservation enterprise. And we have an integration module and also a microservice in the Islandora 2 stack that allows us to use FITS against Islandora files and media. We have Islandora Riprap. Again, Riprap is a separate, it's completely independent of Islandora. It's a fixity validation and auditing service or tool. We have an Islandora Riprap integration module, which provides a user interface for administrators to use Riprap on an Islandora repository. I'm sorry if you can hear some screaming. There's a daycare next door to my place, and the kids are screaming in the courtyard. We have Islandora Bagger, which is a utility for creating bags for Islandora content. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And we have Islandora Premise, which is a tool for, a module for representing preservation metadata, in particular premise preservation metadata, in a standardized way for exchange between repositories and so forth. So first, to take a little bit of a closer look at Fedora, which many of us are familiar with. Really, I see it as value-added storage for Islandora, and some institutions will see the value in it, some may not. That's fine. Islandora can be used in both modes. But really, for me, the two value adds are, one, it lets you store your assets on a different location than the Drupal server. Drupal is a web application, and it sits on a web server, and this shouldn't be a big deal, but sometimes storing large amounts of data on a web server is just challenging for a number of reasons. But if you can store that somewhere else, then you have a lot more flexibility, like in a different server, yet to the end user, it all looks like it's going through the Islandora website. It offers a lot of flexibility in your kind of network architecture in terms of scalability and so forth. But the one thing it does provide that Islandora, without just a Drupal Islandora, doesn't provide is the OCFL storage layer. That's the Oxford Common File layout we heard about during the conference a couple of times. And I just show a little minimum, I guess they call it a minimal object in the OCFL specification, but it's just a way of storing content in a directory structure that is preservation friendly. And specifically, I think the big benefit of OCFL is it does versioning in a way that makes sense. So if for your digital preservation strategy and goals, versioning of assets is important. In other words, you're able to peer back in time and see the state of a given object during any of its changes over its lifespan. OCFL can help you do that. And if that's important to you, then you should consider using Fedora as your storage layer within your Islandora repository. Just some detail about Islandora Fits. Again, it extracts technical metadata from the files that you're putting into Islandora and also validates them. So the way that Fits works is it doesn't do a lot on its own, but it wraps and integrates a whole bunch of other tools that are very good at one thing. So the two of the tools that we'll just name here are Jove and EXIF tool. And there's a variety of others that Fits wraps. And it takes the output of all these tools, puts it into a standard XML container, and the aggregate of all that information is useful. It can be useful for preservation activities and other kinds of things. And as you see from the screen snapshot on the right there, a lot of it is extremely specific to file formats. For example, under Jove, you have image height, image width. That's those are pixels, and the color space and all that sort of stuff. Most people aren't interested in this stuff, but it is useful to have. For example, if you want to find, and just to give it a digital preservation example, you find that you have created some TIFFs. You've scanned newspapers, let's say 20,000 pages of newspapers, but the TIFFs that you've generated from scanning those pages are flawed. They have a problem because the software used to generate them, or the scanner hardware used to generate them, had a bug. And you didn't really see the bug up until by looking at it, because viewers for human consumption of files tend to be very forgiving. They hide, little missing pixels and things. Software like Jove or Fido, the file validation or format validation utility, those little glitches that are invisible to the human eye looking at it on the computer screen are not invisible to these tools. They see it and they would record it. And that's important because you want to know if, for example, you have these problems in your files, and you may want to do a query on your repository to say, geez, we've got 10,000 files that have a flaw, and we want to fix them. So I want to identify all those files. You figure out how to do a query on your repository to find those files, and you replace or fix them and put them back. So you can see where this kind of information can be useful for long-term management and preservation and validation of files. And within Islandora, Islandora fits takes the output of fits applied to a particular file, and it persists it as an additional media on the node, typically against your original file. It was tagged as an original file, so that it lives with the media and can be indexed and displayed to an end user, administrative user, like it is here, for example, in various ways, and used in digital preservation processes down the road in the future. Islandora Fits and Fits microservice is a product of the UPEI RDM team. Islandora Riprap. So Riprap, as I mentioned earlier, is it's not part of Islandora. It is independent of Islandora, but can be used to apply fixity auditing to files that are managed by Islandora, or a variety of other storage platforms, including Fedora on its own, or a variety of others. And the Islandora Riprap module does I'll highlight two things here. One is it provides to an administrative user media level information about fixity auditing on the file that is part of that media. So if this looks familiar to you, the first 2/3 of this screen snapshot looks familiar to you, it's because it is the standard Islandora media view. If you click on the media tab in a Islandora node in Islandora 2, you will see something like this, with the added column on the end that's headed fixity auditing. That's added by the Islandora Riprap module, and it shows at the media level here what the status of the fixity auditing status of the file attached to that media, in this case the preservation master file, is in Riprap. Green shows that Riprap has never seen an error. It has never detected a fixity auditing error for that file. And don't have a screen snapshot of it here, but if you click on the details link on the right, you will get the entire history from Riprap for that file. I'll just point out as well that in the second and third media here, going to stand of Islandora stuff, the service file and the thumbnail, I have configured this repository, Islandora repository, configured Riprap to not audit those two files. I only want Riprap to audit what I have tagged as the preservation master file. The other thing it does, which we'll see in a couple of slides, is Islandora Riprap provides a repository level view of fixity check events, fixity auditing events. And so this is at the media level here, very local to a node and the media attached to the node. We have a visualization in a few minutes of, I'll show you in a few minutes, of the repository level view of Riprap. Next thing is Islandora Bagger. The next tool or functionality is Islandora Bagger, and this is again a separate. It's not a module. It's a Drupal module. It's a tool that you run somewhere else, like not necessarily on your Drupal server, but it could be run on your desktop. It could be run on a preservation processing server that generates a bag for a node. And with that, in that bag, you can configure a whole bunch of plugins that will include various kinds of information in the bag, including the media itself. So in this example here on the right, this is the bag looked at in as a directory, file system directory. We see img_1410.jpg. That's the media. That's the file for this particular node, and you get to tell Islandora Bagger which Islandora media use tags to use to include the media in the bag. So you could say, you tell Bagger in the configuration file, I want only the original file and the preservation master file, and if you tell it those two Islandora media use tags in your configuration file, it only includes those two media in the file. In the bag, it doesn't include the thumbnails and the OCR and all that stuff. Just to kind of explain briefly a few of the other files that we see here in the data directory of this bag. And again, the data directory is a required part of a bag, and that directory is where all of the content is. The things that are not in the data directory, bag info text and bag it and so forth text, those are metadata for the bag. But your content is always in, not always, but the place that it expects, the bag expects and bag utilities expect your data to be is in the data directory. So we have the image file, that is the original file in this case. We have something called metadata.csv. So here's where it gets interesting. It is one thing to put a file in a bag, because a file is kind of a file, more or less. But Islandora doesn't treat files, doesn't treat files any differently. If you deposit an image, it's going to keep that image. That's the original file by default. But Islandora has its own way of expressing metadata, like describing that object, that node, as we are well aware, and has unique relationships between the description and the file. This is the node media relationship. So what Islandora Bagger lets you do is, again, you enable plugins to do this. You can tell Islandora Bagger what to include in the bag. And in this case, I've been told it to include the node JSON, the media JSON, the metadata CSV, like all these files. I had to tell it to do that because my institution's digital preservation action plan says we are interested in all these things, or we can justify having all these things in the bag. So of course we want the media. We also want metadata about the media, like that is the description that is represented as an Islandora node. That is represented here in two different ways, well, three different ways really. One is the metadata CSV, and what that is just as the name suggests, it is a CSV file with one header row and one content row. That's it. It's not 1,000 rows, it's one row. And the header in the CSV are the Islandora node, content type node field names. The idea here being that that is a relatively abstract way of and simple way of representing the metadata that describes the media in the other content in the bag. But because it is relatively simple and straightforward, there's a lot of richness that has been filtered out to create that metadata CSV. And we include the node JSON and the media JSON, and this is the full JSON representation of those two Drupal entities, just in case the person opening up this bag in 50 years is interested in more data. Those two things are not going to be too useful to that person in 50 years, because by then things will have evolved where that particular representation of the metadata is not going to be super evident, but we include them just in case. And the same with the node turtle RDF. This is the RDF representation in turtle serialization. So this is RDF, so bear with me. It's RDF in the turtle format describing the metadata of the node. So the data in the node JSON and the node turtle RDF are going to be the same data, but the node turtle RDF is going to have the RDF representation of that data. The media use summary TSV is extremely important, and I tried desperately just before this presentation, this workshop, to get you an example I could show, but I couldn't for technical reasons. What it does is it is kind of metadata about one very important aspect of this bag, and that is what is IMG 1410.jpg. And don't forget this, what we're doing here is creating a bag to put it into cold storage. This is an archival information package, and it should be documented outside of Islandora, what these things mean, but there's a chance that the documentation is going to become detached from the content 50 years from now. Probably a pretty good chance. And so we need to have some metadata in there, some data in there that tells us what are we looking at. Like, sure, we're looking at whatever is described in metadata.csv and the other files, but the media use summary.tsv is a way of taking that linked data URI for original file that we've defined in the Islandora media use vocabulary. All the entries in the standard Islandora media use vocabulary have a URI that points to, I think, typically one of the a particular vocabulary. I just choking on the name. The media use summary TSV is a tab separated value file that says that this media is identified by this linked data URI. Like, this is the purpose of this media. In the case of if img_1410 JPEG is the original file, then the contents of that media use summary TSV file are going to be the name of that file, img1410.jpg, tab to separate. It's a tab separated value file, and then the linked data URI for that media use tag. Because if we just included the term ID for that media use tag, that would be completely meaningless to someone in 50 years. I'm going to talk about the meaninglessness of Islandora, of a Drupal node and media and taxonomy term IDs in a few minutes, but we need to have something in this package that is much more globally interpretable and durable than node and media and taxonomy term IDs. We need to have linked data. The best we can do is to include linked data URIs or other kinds of persistent IDs that will give someone in 50 years an idea of what this thing is. One of the lessons, so I developed this tool, as you can probably tell from my enthusiasm about talking about it, and also was part of the development team for the Islandora 7X Baggett tool, Baggett module. And that 7X, we did it wrong. We, I have to admit, to generate bags for everything in a collection is just going to kill a Drupal server. It just takes so much time and effort. It's going to swamp the server. So Islandora Bagger was designed specifically to not do that. It is a completely separate command line tool that uses Islandora's or Drupal's REST interfaces to get content from Drupal, and that in doing that will minimize the load on the Drupal server and put the load somewhere else compared to doing all this expensive bag generation directly within the Drupal server in real time as the user sits there and clicks on a button. So it is much more scalable than the Islandora 7X Baggett solution. Just to move on to Islandora premise. I'm not going to talk about this too much because it's quite arcane and even more arcane than bags. But just to summarize again, as I said earlier, it's a way, premise is a way of expressing preservation metadata that's fairly standardized. It's a Library of Congress standard in many systems, including Archematica and any serious digital preservation. Any system that claims to be serious with digital preservation will either generate or consume premise, or both. And this module will take metadata produced by other Islandora modules, like the Islandora core module, or like Islandora Riprap and Islandora fits, and serialize it into the standard representation of premise version 3, which is Turtle RDF. And just, I won't spend much time on this slide, but just to show you how this works, there are two, this is a chunk of a much longer premise RDF document for, or serialization for a node. And the first chunk here describes the file, a PDF file called Evaluation and Effectiveness of Digital Preservation.pdf. that's sitting in a Fedora repository, as you can see from the URL. But one of the things you want to include in premise is the fixity auditing history of that file. And so each fixity auditing event is going to have its own chunk of our RDF. And the second chunk here in this little screen snapshot is one of those. It's the first one, the first fixity event. And the link is, if you can see this, but from where you're sitting, but this UUID identifies uniquely this fixity auditing event. And in the premise, it is identified and associated with that file here. So this UUID is a unique ID for matches this fixity auditing event. And in this way, this is a very kind of indirect way of representing a series of events, but there's a long list of events here. You can see two of them and a bit of a third one. And each of those has its own chunk of RDF that describes the fixity auditing event and its outcome, its date, its outcome, success in this case. So premise is used mainly, premise is not stored internally in Islandora in one place. It brings together on demand all of these bits of metadata and data and serializes them into this output format, this RDF output format. And the reason you would do this is because, as I illustrated in my slide with the 10 years and then the 50 years, as you move between platforms, if you want, if it's important to your organization, that's a big if it's important to your organization to retain the history of that object in the previous repository platforms, you will need a way to represent that data throughout time, right? As you move across platforms over years. And Premise is good at that. That's what it's kind of for. And so if you generate this data on migration to a new platform, you could, in theory, if you want to take the effort to do this, you could take that data and store it somewhere or use it in some way in the target platform, thereby retaining all of the fixity auditing and other event outcomes, the history of those outcomes, those actions and events across platforms. This may not be a important underpinning of your organization's digital preservation plan because it takes a lot of effort, but the capability to do that is there if it is going to be important to you. So those things I just went through are, I think, things we have today. I think they need to be tested more. They need to be tweaked and improved, but they're ready to go today. And many Islandora 2 implementers are already implementing many of them. The next few things I'll talk about are things that we don't do very well in Islandora 2, and we could though. Reporting, we need to do reporting better. Persistent identifiers. This is a major problem for Islandora and other systems, but I'll get on the soapbox here in a minute about persistent identifiers. We don't do them. We need to do them. Normalization is the creation of derivatives that from the original file that upscale that file to a more preservation friendly format. And distributed storage, I talked about a few minutes ago how Fedora repository, FC repo, can let us do distributed storage, and it can do that today if we want to configure it to do that. But many sites will choose not to use Fedora. And for those who don't, and even for those who do, there should be different ways of easily adding to an Islandora repository ways of creating copies of your content in multiple places. That is to say, you don't want it to have it stored only in one place. And distributed storage does that. And I'll go through these a little bit more detail, and then we'll head on to our activity. So reporting, I know Rosie has opened an issue for this discussion issue on Islandora documentation, GitHub repo. And I think we've talked about this in various ways throughout the last few years in the development of Islandora 2. It would be great to have some better reporting for Islandora. And if you're at the demo of the Islandora repository reports module that I did on Wednesday, you will have seen this. But this is a report from that module that shows media by MIME type, right? So here we have 18,000, 19,000 media in the repository, and this breaks down how many of each MIME type we have. This kind of reporting would be important for preservation purposes because you want to know, for example, for format migrations, are there any very strange and peculiar MIME types represented or present in my repository because you've decided that these are high risk. This format, this particular MIME type, which is more or less equivalent to a file format, that if we have any of those in our repository, we want to know about it and we want to do something about it because that format is becoming at risk. So this kind of reporting would be very useful. The Islandora repository reports module will do this for you today, but it is only one of many, like it's only one report, right? I think what we need in Islandora, if we want to become a better digital preservation platform, is dedicated, focused reporting tool set for digital preservation purposes. So this is one example of what we want to do, but there are many others. For example, all that fits metadata that I showed you earlier on, we can index that. In fact, it is, I think it is by default indexed by the Islandora fits module. And it would be very into Solar, and it would be very useful to be able to have canned reports that will let, or reporting tool that would let us say, I need to know how many TIFFs are in my repository that have a color profile matching this, for example, because that particular color profile is presenting a problem in my OpenSeaDragon viewer. So that's not preservation necessarily, but it uses data that is generated as part of a preservation process. But you can imagine all sorts of other kinds of reports that are more preservation specific that we want to be able to do in Islandora if we're calling it a highly functional, preservation-friendly digital assets management system. This is the report from Islandora Riprap that I mentioned earlier on that shows at a repository level. This is at all files in your Islandora that Riprap knows about. So that could be all files. It could be a very specific subset of files like your original files or preservation file, master files, or what have you. But what this chart shows is each red dot is a failure, is one or more fixity auditing event failures. And you would never want to see this in your life. If you saw this, there's something wrong. This is faked up data just to kind of make sure the chart is working. But if you each of the red dots it shows when, and the lower or the horizontal axis is dates, months in this case, and the vertical axis is the number of failed events. Each of those dots plots which month Riprap detected a failed fixity auditing event. What you do want to see is this, because this says that Riprap has not detected any fixity auditing events. So this is what you want to see. But again, this reporting is generated by a particular module, and that's fine. But it's not. But it's specific to that module. And to get at it, you have to go into a set of menus in the Drupal admin interface that are not, centrally located as a preservation reports functionality. So again, the functionality exists. To say it's deficient is unfair, but it's not deficient. It's there. It's just that it's not integrated into something that we would be able to package up as a digital preservation, feature. Persistent identifiers. Yeah, we don't do them and it's a problem because what we're using right now in Islandora is Drupal node, media, and taxonomy IDs, and those are bad because they are specific to one Drupal. And if you look at the URL of a node or a media or a taxonomy term, unless you've gone out of your way already to create an alias using path auto or something of that nature in Drupal, the way you can do it. Those are going to be raw, like /node/1025 or /media/16 or /taxonomy/term/some number. And when the Drupal that you're currently using is no longer living in this world, those are going to be completely useless. And this is a problem, not today, because everything works, but it's going to be a problem in those bags. If you're packaging up an archival information package, doesn't matter if it's in a bag or some other packaging format, and you're putting Drupal media, node, or term ID in there, someone, maybe not you, but your grandchild is going to, or someone else's grandchild is going to have a problem 50 years from now, because those things are going to be completely useless. And they have meaning today, they're not going to have meaning in 50 years. So I think, and I'll take this opportunity to say now publicly, we really, not just for digital preservation, but just to fix this problem, we need to really have an honest conversation about how persistent IDs work and should work, and how easy they can be made to work in Islandora repositories. Because I think this is a slow rot, right? If we don't fix this, we're going to have problems later on. To be durable, IDs must be supported by institutional commitment. Just having a technical solution that generates persistent IDs is not enough. Persistent IDs are really fundamental to the long-term integrity and access of content, and anything that has long-term in it means there has to be institutional commitment to back it up. So not only do we need an easy to use, effective tool set within Islandora, or an easy bolt-on tool set to create persistent identifiers, we need a way to make it easy for our organizations and other implementers of Islandora to commit to making sure that those identifiers are durable. At SFU, we are looking at ARCs, and many of you have already implemented ARCs. I know U of T SC has. I know that University of Nevada, Las Vegas has. I think Arizona State University has. There are lots of people implementing ARCs, and at SFU, we're almost certainly going to be implementing ARCs soon to create persistent IDs for Islandora content. And other non-Islandora content as well. We're trying to figure out, the technology is easy, we're trying to figure out the organizational place for that, the context and the commitment, and what we need to put in place to make sure those things are, those IDs are persistent and durable. Really love to have a conversation with all of you, or any of you, about how we can help solve this problem. Normalization is the creating derivatives from original files, from ingested files, that are more preservation friendly than the original file, or not necessarily preservation friendly. It could be more access friendly as well, but really for preservation purposes, we're talking about normalization into preservation friendly formats. Islandora doesn't do this at the moment. In Islandora 7X, we had a part of the Islandora PDF module was an option to create PDF-A from any PDF that was ingested using the Islandora PDF solution pack. And that was an example of preservation normalization in Islandora. We don't do this now. We could, though, because we have really I think, robust microservices architecture. Robust, and if not robust, flexible. So it would be simple to write and maybe people have already talked about this, but implement a microservice that takes a Microsoft Word file and converts it on ingest as a microservice to an ODF format equivalent. And that is the normalized preservation-friendly version that we then tag as the preservation master file in our Islandora repository. So this screen snapshot is from the Archivematica format policies wiki, and Archivematica is really a leader in this worldwide. Like it does, this is the one thing it does really, it is one thing it does very, very, very well. And that is, it has a very sophisticated format policy registry that allows the creation of rules that say when it encounters a .docx file or a .pptx file or whatever, do these things to normalize it for preservation on one hand and access on the other. This is the summary, a enumerable summary of the media type is a group of files. So for word processing files, you have, as it says here, doc, WPD, RTF, and the target formats that the Archivematica normalization microservices apply or output. So in the case of, for example, presentation files right in the middle of this chart, file format, the input file format is PPT. So if Archivematica sees a PPT file, it will normalize it for access, in this case, to PDF. And they do that because, as you can see in the normalization tool column, they're still looking, this is out of date, I think, but they're still looking for a tool that can do that. The point here is that you can't always rely on your original file, what we call the original file in Islandora, to be preservation friendly. And in some cases, you may know for sure that they are not preservation friendly. In particular, if the original file is a proprietary format, which tend not to be so preservation friendly as open formats. A little while ago, at the beginning of I think when I talked about David Rosenthal, I mentioned that people, over time in the digital preservation community, people have started worrying less about file format obsolescence. And there's a big debate about that. But generally speaking, people were much more worried about it back in the 90s than they are now. So normalizing from the original file to a preservation-friendly format may not be quite as important in some organizations' digital preservation policies as it would have been back earlier in the history of digital preservation. But you could think of some cases where, for example, you may want to do that. And again, this is an area where Islandora doesn't currently do it. I think we have the infrastructure and the patterns in place to do it. Specifically, we create a microservice that will normalize into preservation-friendly formats for 4 different formats and create, actions and context to do that, and then we can have it. Distributed storage, this is the last one I'll talk about before we go on to start moving forward a bit more quickly. If you use Fedora in your Islandora stack, you can host that Fedora somewhere else. You probably aren't going to be hosting it on the same machine server as your Drupal. It might be, but it may not be. You could have it sitting off somewhere in a different data center, for example. But ideally, and this is a trend or idea in digital preservation that has not been kind of refuted, or that people are not worrying about less over time, and that is you should have multiple copies of your stuff in multiple geographically distributed places in order for it to really be robustly stored. And really the 2 main reasons why that's the case. One is geopolitical upheaval. So sorry, I don't want to get into details about specific incidents, but at the moment, but it is totally possible that if a country, all of a country's important digital assets are stored in that country, and that country is invaded, that those can be destroyed. Simple as that. That's a geopolitical risk for long-term access to content. One that really hits home, I think, more in North America is natural disasters. I'm speaking to you today from an area that is supposed to have a very, very large earthquake in the next 200 years. And I'm on top of a mountain that has sometime in recent history had a significant landslide. So you can see where a large part of Burnaby Mountain has slid off into the ocean. In central North America, there are tornadoes, floods, you name it, right? So you want to have your stuff stored in multiple geographic locations. And right now in Islandora, we can't really do that easily. There are existing integrations that do that. And I'll name a couple. Well, we saw a couple today in this conference. One is UPEI's use of OneDrive for data sets. So they're going to integrate that so that they're going to bag up the data set, ship it off in an automated way to Microsoft OneDrive, which is in the cloud and therefore, in theory anyway, and almost certainly in practice, geographically distributed in terms of storage and backups and copies. And we've seen UTSC in their presentation do the same thing, but not with OneDrive, but with the Ontario Libraries Research Cloud, the OLRC. In Islandora 7X, we have BC ELN's ARCA, which has a very slick integration with the Westvault storage network. Westvault is local to Western Canada. It's in the Manitoba westward. And there are five copies of bagged up content from ARCA across that network. So one thing it would be really useful to do is to have a very easy way, standardized way to, for example, configure 3 different commercial cloud providers. So library has, access to AWS, they have access to Azure storage, and they have access to something else. And they simply just want to click a couple of buttons and push off their stuff in a copy of their stuff in each of those. This is kind of how BC ELNs works. A repository manager just clicks on a box. It says, store this, collect everything in this collection in Westvault. And some processes happen nightly, I think, some scheduled basis that bags up each node in the collection and pushes it off into Westvault all automatically. That is specific to ARCA and specific to Westvault. What I'm talking about here is an easy to use way for any repository manager to do that. So what does all this stuff mean, all these functionalities? I started off this presentation by saying Islandora is not a preservation solution. Let's not think about it in that way. And I still maintain that. But going through all of the various capabilities that we have today that you can kind of enable today and learn about and play with and figure out how they fit into your digital preservation strategy. I wanted to use an example that shows how all this stuff fits together in a diagram. And I emphasize diagram intentionally because I have something else to say about the diagrams in general in the next 2 slides away. But I want to use UTSC's technology stack slide. I wasn't able to attend the presentation, but I did ask Kirsten if I could use a slide, and she very graciously let me do that. But I want to just use this as an example. There are many others. UTSC is doing it right, but so are many others. But this is a really nice, clear depiction of how a lot of these digital preservation functionalities fit together in terms of a kind of an architecture diagram. And so as you can see, we have kind of the ordinary Drupal around our stuff there. We have Cantaloupe, Solar, Triple Store, and so forth. But just to highlight some of the things I mentioned earlier in the presentation here, we have Baggett. We have, and you can see, I mentioned a minute ago where UTSC is bagging up their content and shoving it off into their provincial shared storage cloud, OLRC, which has four copies across Canada. So there's Baggett bagging up content, pushing off into their distributed shared storage. We have Riprap, who is constantly monitoring files in the Islandora instance. Fits is a microservice on the left, so it is running along with other microservices on ingest, typically, or demand to generate the Fits metadata for files. that are submitted or ingested. And then we have the ARC minting. Again, this is an example of a site that's kind of addressing the the persistent identifier problem by minting ARCs for content and resources in Islandora. Though I don't know a lot about the way they're using ARCs, but I assume that each ARC, an ARC is like a DOI, if you're not familiar with ARCs, similar functionality. They mint an ARC and it goes back into the metadata of an object, right? So it's in a field, a Drupal field, so, identifier, ARC, whatever the field is called, so that identifier is associated, bundled tightly with the object, and can be used to reference it, and can be used to reference it in terms of relationships with other objects. So if there's a collection, then ideally the collection, like is member of attribute in child objects, in member objects would point to the ARC and not to the node ID, for example. Getting into too many details here, and assuming I know something about how ETSC is using ARCs, but this is a visual representation of how all these digital preservation bits fit together in an architecture diagram. Now, an architecture diagram is awesome, and this is an awesome example of one, but really, my phone is buzzing rapidly. I think there's something wrong at work. Just give me a second, please. Nope. An architecture diagram is not the goal. It is a tool to represent how a complex system works. To bring this around to digital preservation policies and action plans and strategies, you need not only the diagrams, but you need a written document that demonstrates and articulates an organization's commitment to digital preservation. And these are typically take the form of digital preservation policies, or digital preservation frameworks, which are high-level documents, and then action plans, which tend to be more specific and technical, contain more technical detail, describing what the particular actions are to ensure the durability of particular kinds of content. And I'll just point to one example here, one library that I think is doing a very good job of articulating the digital preservation strategy in terms of policy and action plans. That's York University in Toronto. There are others. I'm just picking one here. I encourage you to take a look at the preservation policy and action plans that they have there, the linked from this slide. And want to point out that, as far as I can tell, none of these documents uses the word Islandora, and that's good. You don't necessarily need to highlight the tool that you're using, or the platform you're using to do this work. And I think it's good that we don't, because, as I said in my, my one single point I want you to take away from this presentation is that Islandora is not a solution to these problems. It is an enabler for organizations to solve the problems and to deal with the problems. And I personally would rather see the Islandora, even though I want to promote it widely and celebrate it, I'd rather not see it named in digital preservation plans, because I think these plans and these policies really transcend in terms of time, a particular platform. And if we start naming the platform in our plans, then I think we fall back into that pattern of relying on a platform to solve our problems. The problems exist out there. We need a good platform and good tools to help us solve them, if they do not themselves solve them. So I've spoken probably about 30 or 40,000 words over the last hour and 15 minutes. I just want to pause before we get into our activity in the last 15 minutes to see if there are any questions or comments or anything like that. I really want this to be useful for you. So Isabella, can you help me No,
I was just
there-
taking a look at the chat. There was a comment earlier. They said with respect to Islandora Bagger, they would love to see Islandora Bagger to add functionality to ingest bags. They had mentioned this previously, and there was a thought this might be possible, but they also said they were willing to test or whatever they can to support and make this happen.
That's a great question. Thanks to whoever asked it, and it's been asked by more than one person over the last few years. We could totally do that. Technically speaking, it's not that difficult. What is difficult is that because the bags can contain a wide variety of representations of an Islandora object and details about an Islandora object. To do a round trip would mean getting the metadata basically in the files into the bag, and you can do that now. And then to get them back into Islandora, we would need some way of converting from what we have in the bag to what the current Islandora expects. And if you dump the bag out of Islandora on a Monday and then you wanted to re-ingest that object into the same Islandora on a Friday, that would not be a problem because it would be presumably the same Islandora. But Islandora is going to change over time. If your bag is put away in cold storage and archival storage, hopefully distributed archival storage for 10 years, and that's when you want to re-ingest it, it's not going to be the same Islandora. So I think the solution to this problem is to not ingest directly from a bag into Islandora, but to convert what is in the bag into a format that the current Islandora can ingest. And I've been thinking about this in terms of Islandora Workbench quite a bit because, and Alan Stanley has shown this, how to use Workbench in this way with an Islandora 7X repository. Workbench just needs CSV. I mean, it's a crazy CSV, but it's just CSV. And if, in terms of bags, if we had a way of taking a bunch of bags and extracting the content of them and converting that into Workbench CSV and the file structure that CSV expects, then you could ingest that very easily. So what I would rather see, as opposed to I would rather not promote a direct migration into Islandora from a set of bags, but looking at it more in terms of a kind of a mini migration. So you have a bunch of bags, but you need some way to get them into a format that you can easily ingest into Islandora. And Workbench is one tool. You could do it with a variety of other tools, for example, with the Drupal Migrate framework or whatever. But else you're using, probably one of those two for batch ingests. But yeah, so we can do this. I think what it would mean, though, would be taking the bags for your organization and knowing what you put into them, because you have a kind of an expressed, archival information package specification, is using that specification to then reverse engineer the bags. And this could be a simple script that would take the bags, unpack them, write out onto CSV files and payload files and child objects and all that stuff into a format like that which Workbench requires, and then you could import those bags, no problem. So it's a really great thing to want. I just think that it's going to be problematic over time because of the reasons I mentioned. Things are going to fork, like Islandora is going to be different from when it created the bag, probably. And certainly will be if you're talking about 10 years from now or longer. But that content, we put that content in the bags for a reason. That was so we could get at it later on and get at it in a structured way. And so all we need to do is take the structure in the bag, inherent or explicit in the bags, convert it into the import format du jour, and import it.
Thank you for that response, Mark. We also had another question in the chat referring to Fedora. They say earlier in the conference, day one, during the non-technical overview, it was mentioned that it would be very difficult or even impossible to rebuild an Islandora 2.0 repo from Fedora in the event, say, your Drupal instance was hacked and your database lost.
Right.
Can you speak to what the actual added value of Fedora as a digital preservation storage layer is if one can't restore their repository from it? And there's been a bit of back and forth in the chat, but I know they'd like to hear from you too.
Right. So first off, this sounds pedantic, and I apologize for that in advance. But digital preservation, like Fedora, is the processes that we talk about in terms of digital preservation. So bags, something like Fedora and the OCFL, they're not backups. They're backup. Standard IT backups are a much more effective way of solving that problem. Instead of rebuilding a repository, why don't we just restore from tape or whatever the backup is? And I apologize for sounding pedantic about it, but that's a different problem. Like, backups are not preservation, and preservation is not backups. The purpose of backups is to be able to restore something after it's been hacked. Preservation, that's really not a problem with preservation. Preservation, because backups have a time arc, a time arc of days to months to a year, something like that. Digital preservation has a timeline of tens of years, so 10, 20, 50, 100 years. It sounds abstract, but that's really the timeline we're working on. So I don't think we should conflate preservation processes with backup processes. That said, going back to the bag conversation a minute ago, you really could recreate your repository from a set of bags, well-crafted bags. You couldn't just enable Bagger and have it do its thing and then use those bags to restore your repository. You have to think about it in terms of, what am I bagging up? Like, what am I exporting from my Islandora, and how am I storing it in a way that we can then resurrect that content and get it back into Islandora, into a Drupal. In terms of Fedora, I think the added value is really its OCFL file storage. And again, that is really a long-term value or advantage. It's not something you may see advantage in early on. It's almost like, compound interest in a bank account. Sure, it's cents now, but if you kept it in there for 100 years, it would be, $1 million. That's the kind of timeline like a lot of these preservation toolings are really talking about. So I understand the desire to be able to restore a repository from these things we're calling added value, but I don't think that's the purpose. That's my take on it. Others may have a different take on it, but I don't see them serving that purpose. The tool you want to use to restore a hacked Drupal is your IT backup. I'd be happy to hear other perspectives, but that's just mine.
I'll try to make it short so you can repeat it.
Okay.
But and I noticed it does things like it can pull out the title and author information from envision possibly a use of Islandora.
Sorry, Alexander, I couldn't really hear all of your question. Isabella, can you repeat it? Or for others on Zoom?
Right here. Okay. Hi, Mark. Sorry about that. So you talked about fits and its ability to extract metadata. And I'm kind of just thinking about brainstorming, maybe with some other people in the room, the idea of using Islandora as a way to dump a bunch of documents that maybe have authoring and title information in them. And maybe part of the ingest process could use fits as a source of that information instead of having somebody type out that metadata in a different place. And maybe you can, does anything come to mind about how that might be architected? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great idea. In fact, I kind of played with that a little bit. You won't recall this, but back in Islandora conference here in Vancouver in October of 2019, I demoed a drop, a little trick really of dropping dropping a PDF file onto a desktop icon and then having it pushed up into Islandora via REST interface. And part of that little script that was attached to that desktop shortcut was a I forget which utility, maybe Exitool, maybe something else, to grab the properties out of the PDF and then use that in the node. Like say, for example, like the ones you mentioned, like author and title, which are almost always something in them. Yeah, in fact, there's like to me, this would not be, well, here's an idea just off the top of my head, and thanks for letting me think of this, but I'm not going to answer in response, I'm not going to respond in terms of preservation, but in terms of Islandora Workbench, because that's really where I'm spending my time these days. Right now, Workbench can let you can point it at a directory of files, and you don't need a CSV with metadata in it. You can just point a directory of files, and it will very stupidly take, and this is where I just had the insight thanks to what you just asked me, it very stupidly takes the file title, the file name, and uses that as a stub title because in Drupal you need to have a title in the node. So it needs something to put in the title field. So the node it creates has the dumb looking file name as the node title, which is totally useless. It would be really simple to, as you suggest, take instead of Workbench just taking the file name and putting it in the title, to run a little intermediary script which could extract any document properties that are in that thing, whether it's an image, a PDF, or a Word file, and push those up into Islandora using what is probably more useful as titles and creators. Yeah, that'd be a great little Hackfest or Useathon project, is to do that. Totally doable, and probably something that would show pretty impressive results with low effort.
Thank you, Mark. I'm conscious of time and the fact that we're running out of it. We had one more question in the chat, but I wonder if you'd like to try to get through your last bit of slides.
Yeah, I'm not going to get through the activity because I was going to hope to reserve 20 minutes to let people look at the documents, but so what I wanted you to do, and to reinforce the idea that I've been promulgating here, is that Islandora is not a comprehensive A to Z soup to nuts preservation solution. It is really a set of functionalities that enable us to undertake digital preservation. Is to shift the focus from Islandora to your organization, and to do that. And again, I don't think we have time to, and I respect other people's time here, in particular, to do this as a group, but using the Digital Preservation Coalition's rapid assessment model, that's the thing that I mentioned quite a few slides ago, where I was breaking out the different items in these 3 documents that focused on technology, and the rest were all organization. What I wanted, please, if you have capacity and interest on your own time, take the DPC's rapid assessment model. There's an Excel worksheet and an accompanying guide which tells you how to use the worksheet. And in that, you have to rate your organization on the various categories or capabilities that it defines. And I've taken the liberty of kind of providing what I thought were reasonable, maybe a little bit aspirational scores for any organization who is using Islandora to in these categories, in the HIJK, the bitstream, these ones you see on the screen. Like you just plop those into the spreadsheet. It is if you're using Islandora, but that's not the approach I want you to take. I want you to take a look at the worksheet and the guide, and ask yourself, like, where would I put my organization currently in this spectrum of the scores are 0 to 4, I think, and they ask questions about like institutional commitment and legal ability to preserve, and things of this nature, which are have really very little to do with technology, and they're all about the organization. But that was the activity I wanted to spend some time on. And because we don't have enough time to do this, I was hoping to have a conversation amongst people who are willing to share where do they score their organizations, and where do they see Islandora within their organizations supporting improving their scores in this rapid assessment model. So I encourage you to do that on your own. I'm sure we didn't get to it during the workshop, but I really hope that you found some of the content useful. And thanks for indulging me in getting up on the soapbox in a couple of places, because this is a topic, this is probably the most important part of Islandora to me professionally, is how we can use it to support our digital preservation going forward. I really want to see Islandora succeed as a platform in helping us as a community and individual implementers implement effective digital preservation, using Islandora as one of those enablers to do that.
And we can make those slides available in the public drive so that people have the chance to work through that activity as well. Thank you for your presentation, Mark.
Thank you, everyone who's present, and thanks for the questions at the end. They were very, very helpful and very useful.